Let's do another underground video for a change and have a look at the burial sites of the Dukes of Brabant preceding Philip the Good. I have already partially covered some of these burial sites in previous videos, but now I want to make a dedicated video about the Dukes in order. In this part I will cover the Dukes of Brabant up till, but not including Anthony of Burgundy, Philip the Good's uncle. This is just an overview and not a very in-depth analysis. As you know by now, it's always a work in progress and new facts may appear or errors may have sneaked their way in. I will also not concentrate on the additional titles of the dukes, such as Duke of Lower Lorraine. Brabant was a region in what's currently central Belgium and the south of the Netherlands. Here is a 16th century map of Brabant as an example. The territory changed little over the centuries, but you get the idea. Some of the main cities of the duchy were Antwerp, Brussels, Louvain and Den Bosch in what's currently the Netherlands. Brabant used to be a county, but it was promoted to a duchy as a compensation for the participation of Count Gottfried and his son in the defense of Jerusalem against Saladin. The first Duke of Brabant was Gottfried's son Henry, known as Henry I or Hendrik I in Dutch. Henry was born in Louvain around 1165. He led a war-filled life, but I'm not going into detail today. We're just concentrating on the burial places and some small trivia in this video. When Henry was about 70 years old, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick asked him to accompany his English fiancée Isabella Plantagenet to Germany. The journey and the festivities took their toll on the old duke. He got ill and died in Köln on the 5th of September 1235 after getting back from Mainz where he had taken Isabella. Henry was buried in the Teutonic way, which means his corpse was boiled so the bones could be extracted from the flesh and more hygienically transported. The bones of the Duke were brought to Louvain with great pomp in the presence of a large company. The remaining flesh was probably buried somewhere in Köln. Henry was buried in St. Peter's Church in Louvain. His mausoleum was placed in the middle of the choir. Over time, his tomb and bones were moved around a few times, during which the bones were mixed and switched with other members of his family, until they were recovered again in 2019 during renovation works on the tomb. Currently, the mausoleum is on display in the Chapel of St. Anthony, and his bones are buried in the crypt together with those of his son, his father and his grandfather. In the past, the tombstone had already been heavily restored and recreated as it was badly damaged and partially lost. It's interesting to note that Henry's skull shape had a particular shape that was genetically passed down from his ancestors. In the St. Peter's Church, one can also see the tombstone of his first wife Mathilda and their daughter Marie. Mathilda de Boulogne was the daughter of Mathieu d'Alsace, son of Thierry d'Alsace, who, according to legend, brought a holy blood relic to Bruges. Henry's second wife, Marie de France, was the daughter of the French king Philip II. She is said to have been buried in the Abbey of Affligem, but no tomb remains. Henry was succeeded by son Henry II in Flemish Hendrik II. Henry was born in 1207, I'm not sure where. His mother was Mathilda of Boulogne, mentioned before. Henry married twice. His first wife was Mary, daughter of the King of Germany, Philip of Swabia. As mentioned before, she was buried with a mother in Louvain. After her death, Henry married Sophie of Thuringia. Henry died in Louvain on the 1st of February 1248. I'm not quite sure of the cause of his death. Henry was buried in Villers Abbey, a favorite place of the Duke. His tomb was situated between two columns on the right side of the choir. His wife Sophie died in 1275 at the age of 51 and she was buried with her husband. In 1620, the tomb was already damaged. We can find an engraving of it in an old book. Strangely enough, there is no effigy of Sophie to be seen in the image. Maybe the sculpture had already disappeared from the tomb, or maybe there never was one. Henry's remains were excavated and in 1930 they were transferred from the abbey to St. Peter's Church in Louvain. Henry was succeeded by Henry, the third of his name, son of Henry II and Mary of Swabia. He was born around 1230. In 1251, he married Adelaide or Aladis of Burgundy, daughter of Hugh IV, Duke of Burgundy, and Yolanda of Dreux. Henry died in his castle in Louvain on the 28th of February 1261. According to Bodkens, he had fallen ill some time before, and his health had been getting worse since. He was buried in the Dominican Church of Louvain, and so was his wife, who died in 1273. Why this was the case needs a bit of background. The counts and the early Dukes of Brabant resided in the fortress on the Keizersberg or Caesar's Hill. They had a previous dwelling there, inside a city named Bassa Curtis, aka the Lower Court, also known as the Duke's Island. Henry let the Dominicans live in a house near this palace, which he donated to them in 1256 so they could build a convent there. In 1258 he gave them a large part of the grounds of the palace enclosed by the River Deile and its branch the A. An old engraving of around 1715 shows what the convent looked like in the past. Parts of Henry's tomb still exist, but the church is now a concert venue and not open to the general public, and I have not been able to visit it yet. For its appearance, I have to rely on a picture on the website of Onroerend Erfgoed Vlaanderen and some old engravings. In May 1835, an archaeological examination of the mausoleum was carried out. The effigies were already very badly damaged at that time, possibly due to renovation works on the church floor. Currently, the stone is positioned vertically against the wall. The head of Aladis is preserved and is kept in the M Museum of Louvain. I'm not sure if the head on display is a replica or not. As mentioned before, there are also some engravings of the mausoleum and a probably not very accurate 17th century drawing in Antonio de Succa's Memoriam. Back to the archaeological investigation. Under the stone slab of the mausoleum, a vault was discovered which contained a number of bones. These bones belonged to 3 individuals, that of a strong man, that of a woman, and that of an infant. We can suppose that these bones are of the Duke, his wife, and one of their children, not yet identified. Henry III was succeeded by his son Henry, from now on Henry IV. Henry IV was born in Louvain in 1251, so he was only about 10 when his father died. Henry struggled with both poor physical and mental health. Because of this, he lived under the guardianship of his mother. This led to a number of political problems, but I won't go into that. Two years later, in 1269, Henry entered the Saint-Benigne Abbey in Dijon, in his mother's homeland. We know he was still alive in 1272, but after that Henry's fate is unclear. Henry's brother John, or Jan in Dutch, was born either in 1252 or 1253. He first married Margaret, the daughter of the King of France, and later another Margaret, the daughter of Guy of Dampierre. John was a skilled military leader. His greatest achievement was his victory at the Battle of Worringen in 1288. But John wasn't only a soldier, he was also a poet, a bon vivant, and an experienced tournament fighter. In the end, it was his passion for tournaments that cost him his life. By piecing together several historical documents, we can reconstruct the story of how his death came about. In 1293, Count Henry III of Bar married Eleanor, the daughter of King Edward of England. To celebrate the occasion, large festivities were organized in Bar-le-Duc the following year, in 1294. Eleanor happened to be the sister-in-law of John's son, which explains why Duke John himself was present at these celebrations. On the 3rd of May 1294, around the hour of the Vespers, John donned his armor for a joust. His opponent that day was a certain Pierre de Beaume or perhaps Pierre de Beaufremont, that's not clear. In the 3rd round of the joust, the war horses crashed into each other with such force that both men were thrown to the ground. Unfortunately, Pierre's lance had pierced John's upper arm during the collision. The Duke was mortally wounded and he could no longer stand and was carried back to his lodgings. There he confessed his sins and bid farewell to his attendants. As the sun set, he placed his hand upon his wounded arm and expired, still in the prime of his life. I have found a few other versions of the story, but for now we'll stick with this one. About 30 years later, a chronicler from Liège suggested that John had fallen in love with Eleanor and had tried to abduct her during the festivities. The Duke was buried in the same manner as his forefathers, following the old Teutonic custom. His bones were boiled clean in the Reims, with his flesh interred in the city's cathedral of Notre Dame. The bones themselves were carried in procession to Brussels, where they were led to rest before the high altar of the church of the convent of the Friars Minor. John's second wife, Margaret, had already been buried there since 1285. During the Wars of Religion, John's tomb was destroyed, but in the 17th century, Archdukes Albert and Isabella ordered it rebuilt, covering it with a gilded copper plate, an engraving of which still survives. The monastery and its church have long since vanished. Cue many centuries forward, and in 1988 John's burial vault was uncovered right next to the building of the former stock exchange, the Beurs. John was succeeded by his son, John, creative naming indeed, and he became as known as John II or Jan II. He was born in Tervuren on the 27th of September 1275. Tervuren is a town in Flemish Brabant, just southeast of Brussels. The Dukes of Brabant owned a castle there, which we'll take a closer look at in a future episode. John married Margaret of England, who gave him a son, also named John, but that didn't stop him from gathering a large collection of mistresses and illegitimate children. Some of these bastards went on to found prominent families, among them the House of Glim. John II died on the 27th of October 1312 in his castle at Tervuren, the result of kidney stones. He was just 37 years old. John was buried in the Cathedral of St. Michael and Gudula in Brussels. As a side note, I'm calling it a cathedral now, but in the Middle Ages this was just a collegiate church dedicated to St. Michael. It only became a cathedral in the 1960s, but I'm using the current name to avoid confusion. It actually took some proverbial digging to piece together the history of John II's tomb. Today, inside the cathedral, one can see a mausoleum of the Dukes of Brabant placed just to the left and behind the high altar. But according to older sources, this monument once stood in the middle of the choir. The mausoleum was commissioned around 1610 by Archduke Albert, and it's a Renaissance-style marble tomb topped with an enormous copper lion weighing about 3,000 kilograms. It was cast in 1610 by an artisan named Jean de Montfort. We visited the cathedral not long ago to look for the tombs of Jean and particularly a son of Philip the Good named Antoine, but since it was Christmas time the church was filled with nativity scenes and absolutely packed with people, which made it hard to see much. On top of that, the choir was roped off and not accessible, so I had to turn to books and articles to gather more background information about this tomb. According to a small old book from 1613 I have lying around, describing various tombs in the Duchy of Brabant, John II was buried in the choir of the cathedral, sub terra or underground. There was an inscription on the wall above recording his name, title and the year of his death. On the opposite wall there was another inscription stating that in this same grave lay Anthony, the first son of Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy. Anthony died in 1432 at only about 1.5 years old, and he was indeed buried in the cathedral. The Duke of Burgundy's palace in Brussels was just a short distance away, so this is not very strange. Another source book, the Trophée Sacré of 1729, also describes the tombs, but the description doesn't quite match the book of 1613, but it also does not quite match the current situation. According to the 1729 book, the mausoleum stood in the middle of the choir. Atop it was a gilded bronze lion bearing the coat of arms of Brabant. This description matches the monument commissioned by Archduke Albert in the early 1600s. According to the same book, the remains of Duke John II, his wife Margaret, and the remains of young Duke Anthony, son of Philip the Good, were located inside this tomb. The description is a bit vague at this point. Also, according to this book, there was a memorial plaque in the floor near the tomb with a Latin inscription that the tomb contained the remains of Duke John II and his wife Margaret, daughter of the King of England. Left of this, there was a plaque stating that this was the tomb of Antonius, son of Philip the Duke of Burgundy. Putting it all together though, it looks like there was an underground vault before the altar with the remains, and this mausoleum was placed on top of it, maybe first in the middle and then moved to the side. I'm just guessing at this point. I had to dig a little deeper, and I hope there was a virtual tour of the cathedral somewhere. There was indeed, and this clarified the situation somewhat more. Via the virtual tour, it's possible to take a good look at the mausoleum of the Dukes of Brabant. There are no plaques anywhere near the altar or the tomb to be seen, not in the floor and not on the wall. In fact, there seems to be no information at all in the surroundings of the tomb. Maybe they were removed at some point, I don't know. Turning around in the virtual tour and not visible when approaching from the entrance, an upraised floor and stairs to an underground room have appeared. It turns out this is the entrance to the Romanesque crypt, which can only be visited by appointment. This crypt is just a remainder of the crypt and not a complete building, but it is possible to take a look inside via the virtual tour. In the back wall, more or less before the altar, but underground, a hole has been carved in the wall, and behind it one can see a small burial vault with medieval-looking Latin inscriptions and containing 2 coffins. The inscription on the left wall mentions that Duke Johannes II was buried here. The one on the right tells us that Antonius, firstborn son of Philip the Good, was also buried here. This matches the description of the 1613 book, but the order is reversed. According to the book, the inscription of Antonius was on the left. So more guessing, and it seems the original access was from above and not from inside the old crypt, and the author of the book must have been standing at the other side. Now the coffins. The one on the right is that of Ernest of Austria, who died in 1595 and who is beyond the scope of this series. He also has a mausoleum, and it's placed at 2 o'clock from the high altar, right across the one from the Dukes of Brabant. More digging ensued, and I came across an interview where a historian mentions that John was buried in this vault. Was, past tense. Again a shovel comes out and more info is dug up. On Saturday, 17 May 1834, the so-called vault of the Dukes of Brabant was opened for the burial of the heir to the throne, which also bore the title of Duke of Brabant. 9-month-old Louis Philippe had died the day before, and this was the most suitable burial place at the time. He would later be moved to the royal crypt. The tombs of Jean II and others in this vault have been ransacked during the wars of religion in the 16th century. Ernest was buried after that time, and later his coffin also escaped the pillaging of the revolutionaries in 1793. I did not get any further than this, and so I'll keep it to this. As for the wooden coffin in the vault, I have no idea whom it belongs to. I will have to book me a tour. But let's continue with John II's son. John III, or Jan III in Dutch, was only 12 years old when his father died. As he was still a minor, 3 regions governed in his name: Count Louis d'Evreux, Count Gerard V of Gulick, and Floris Berthout, Lord of Malines and Bernard. John married at a very young age, and his bride was Mary, daughter of Louis d'Evreux, one of the regents. They had at least 3 sons and 3 daughters, and on the side, John had a large collection of mistresses and bastards, following the family tradition. Mary died in 1335 at the age of 31 or 32. The Duke died much later in Brussels on the 5th of December 1355. I have not found an exact cause of his death, but apparently his health had been declining for some time. He was buried before the high altar in Villers Abbey. His tomb disappeared a very long time ago, but an engraving from the 18th century gives an idea what it looked like. It's clear that the tomb was already badly damaged at that time. Interestingly enough, I came across a bit of gossip about where the actual tomb of John III might be. According to a 19th century historian, Alphonse Wouters, the tomb, or at least what remained of it, was located in the castle of a certain Mr. de Man de Lenning at Hevillers, about 10 kilometers from the abbey. The castle referred to must be the castle of Bierbet, and Mr. de Man was the mayor of Hevillers at the time. He was an antiques collector and possessed a couple of tombstones he had bought from the owner of Villers Abbey. Apparently John's tomb was not one of them after all. Or maybe the truth never came out. I did not get any further with this, so let's continue with the next duke, or rather duchess. When John III died, all his sons had already passed away and only daughters remained. This was not a problem as such. Through a charter of Hendrik I from 1204, succession by women was allowed, and it was not stipulated that it had to be the eldest daughter. This caused some competition. In the end, Joanna made it to Duchess, but it was not without much difficulty. I'm not going to discuss this in this video, it's already far too long. Joanna married twice. But no heir came from these marriages. At the end of her life, when her mental and physical health was waning, she lost interest in political affairs. Now, she may not have had children, but she still had relatives, and one of them was Margaret, the daughter of Joanna's sister. Margaret was married to the ambitious Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Bold. Both Philip and Margaret wanted their son Antoine to become the successor of Joanna after her death. Their eldest son, John the Fearless, already possessed enough titles and land in their opinion. In 1404, Antoine was appointed Ruwaard in Brabant, which is something like a regent or governor. A couple months later, Philip himself died in Halle near Brussels quite unexpectedly. Joanna herself died a couple years later in Brussels on the 1st of December 1406. She was buried in the Church of the Carmelites in Brussels. In 1450, her great-great-nephew, Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good, ordered a tomb for her. Unfortunately, it was damaged during the iconoclasm and ultimately destroyed together with the convent during a bombardment in 1695. Side note, the convent was located somewhere near the famous Manneke-Pis statue. Joanna was succeeded as planned by her great-nephew Antoine, but that's for another video, and I hope to welcome you then.